Imagine an auditor walks into your organization today,
Right.
and they don't care about your beautifully designed website.
Obviously not.
No, and they have absolutely zero interest in that, inspiring vision statement painted in massive letters in your lobby. They just ask for one single document, your bank statements.
Oh, that is a terrifying premise for most leaders.
It really is, because according to the text we are diving into today, that auditor will instantly know exactly what your organization truly worships and, frankly, what it is terrified of. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah, handing over the raw financial data like that, I mean, it feels like handing over a diary.
It totally does. It's incredibly intimate. So today we are pulling from excerpts of a really fascinating book chapter. It's titled Where Your Money Reveals Your Mission. And just a quick heads up for you listening, this source material primarily examines churches.
Right, religious congregations.
Exactly. It's looking at how churches and their financial structures operate, how they spend their money. But as we dig into this, you will quickly realize that the principles here, like institutional drift, resource allocation, and that silent, massive gap between stated values and actual spending.
Which is huge.
Huge. Those principles apply to anyone leading, participating in, or even just observing any kind of organization.
Yeah, the church just serves as this ultimate high-stakes case study here.
Why is that?
Well, because churches deal in the currency of ultimate values, right, and divine missions. But human nature, and what the author calls institutional gravity, they work the exact same way everywhere.
Oh, for sure.
Like whether you are analyzing a global nonprofit, a massive corporate ledger, or literally just your own personal family budget, the mechanics of self-preservation operate on the exact same psychological hardware.
That makes total sense. So our mission for this deep dive is to equip you with the tools to read a budget not as a boring, lifeless spreadsheet.
Which is how we usually see them.
Right, just rows of numbers. But we want you to read it as a moral document. The text actually literally calls a budget a theological document written in numbers.
I love that phrase.
It's so good. We are going to explore how organizations slowly drift into this state of self-preservation, how the way money is spent actually disciples and trains the people within those walls.
That's a really deep concept, the discipleship part.
It is, and crucially, we'll look at how to enact strategic, painless realignment, without triggering an absolute institutional civil war. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the ledger itself.
Let's do it.
The text sets up this brilliant, quiet confrontation. It says there's a moment in every organization's life when the stated mission and the actual budget enter a room together.
Yeah.
And they don't scream at each other, they just sit side by side.
And when you put those two documents next to each other like that, the truth becomes totally impossible to ignore.
It's glaring.
Right, because, I mean, we are conditioned to think of a budget as a purely administrative constraint.
Yeah, just numbers on a page.
Exactly. It's a mathematical boundary created by some finance team just to keep the lights on. It feels very technical and detached, but the author forces us to completely strip away that illusion.
Because money is never merely accounting.
Never. It is a confession. The text says it's a map of trust.
A map of trust. I like that phrasing.
It's powerful.
It really is. It means you can say your mission is central. Right, you can preach about it every week, print it on glossy brochures, celebrate it at annual galas.
Post it all over social media.
Exactly. But the budget is the undeniable record of what you actually protect. It reveals what the leadership is willing to delay, and most importantly, what they are willing to sacrifice when resources get tight.
Yeah, look at the typical trajectory. The text points out that this gap between the bold, world-changing vision statement and the actual, usually very conservative budget, it isn't born from malice.
Right.
You don't have, like, a shadowy finance committee sitting in a dark room twirling their mustaches, plotting to destroy the mission.
Right. Nobody schedules a Tuesday morning meeting to officially abandon their core calling.
No, of course not. It happens through drift.
Drift, let's talk about that.
It's just the slow accumulation of habits, the creeping influence of fear, and the entirely natural pressure to preserve what already exists. The text observes that organizations inherit patterns.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so a church might rent a large tent for an Easter service one year because of an overflow crowd.
Okay, totally normal.
Right. It was a temporary response to an immediate need. But the next year, people sort of expect the tent.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The year after that, they want a permanent pavilion.
Yeah.
And before long, maintaining that pavilion becomes a non-negotiable line item. And that line item drains the local outreach fund for a decade.
Wow.
What was meant to be just a temporary tool becomes normal, and the original outward mission becomes merely symbolic.
Because the pressure of institutional gravity is just relentless.
It never stops. You have rising fixed costs, aging facilities, and just the sheer exhausting weight of running a modern organization.
So the temptation to retreat into what feels manageable is incredibly strong.
Exactly. Consequently, the largest allocations predictably flow to salaries, utilities, technology, internal events, the outward-facing mission.
Like global partnerships or local benevolence, community development.
Right.
Yeah.
That stuff gets relegated to a thin little line item at the bottom. It just gets whatever is left over after the internal comforts are secured.
Which brings to mind a pretty practical analogy. Like, if you want to know my actual diet, you shouldn't read my New Year's resolution.
Definitely not.
You need to look at my grocery receipts. I can declare I am on a strict health kick, but if the receipts show, 3 boxes of cookies and a gallon of ice cream every single week.
The receipts don't lie.
Exactly. The receipts are telling the empirical truth. But taking this a step further, I have to ask, does this imply that mission statements themselves are entirely useless? Like, should organizations just stop writing them if they're constantly failing to fund them?
What's fascinating here is the text makes a really careful distinction on this exact point. Mission statements aren't useless.
Okay.
They are the necessary claim of who an organization believes it is. But they are entirely hollow if they aren't backed by the ledger.
So they're aspirational.
Very aspirational. The words articulate the aspiration, but the budget proves what the organization cannot bear to lose. It acts as the ultimate lie detector test.
That's a great way to put it, a lie detector test.
Yeah. If the mission statement declares, "We are a sending community that prioritizes the marginalized," but the budget repeatedly whispers, "Preserve, protect, stabilize, and delay," the organization is living a fundamental contradiction.
It's essentially financing a false story.
It is funding an illusion. And the author draws a sharp theological line in the sand regarding this contradiction.
Let's get into that. What's the theological critique?
Well, the argument is that the gospel cannot be central in an organization's language while remaining secondary in its financial life. The New Testament church, for example, did not treat external witness as an optional elective course.
Like something you only take if you happen to have surplus capital at the end of the fiscal year.
Exactly.
Is there...
Witness was their core identity. So when a church funds its own comforts first and its mission second, it is making a massive theological statement.
It's confessing that its own institutional survival is the highest possible good.
Bingo.
So if the ledger inevitably starts serving the institution's survival rather than the outward movement, we have to look really closely at what exactly is eating up all those resources.
That is usually not what you think.
Right. The text introduces this creeping, subtle danger of maintenance, and it is usually the most boring, responsible-sounding line items in the entire world.
Oh, absolutely. The roof needs repair. The HVAC system is making a weird noise. The nursery needs to meet new safety codes.
And the author is incredibly fair to reality here, right? Maintaining a building is not inherently evil.
No, not at all. Faithfulness has an administrative side.
Right, you can't just ignore the electric bill, let the building fall into total disrepair, and claim you are operating on some higher spiritual plane.
Stewardship definitely requires upkeep.
But the danger arrives when that maintenance stops functioning as a servant and subtly installs itself as the master.
Yes, that shift.
The text identifies this as a critical pivot point for any institution. It's the moment an organization no longer maintains things to support the mission, but subtly begins to view the maintenance as the mission.
That's when the center of gravity shifts entirely from outward witness to inward preservation.
And the driving question in board meetings changes.
It completely shifts. It goes from how do we best deploy our resources to serve the world to how do we ensure the machine keeps running.
Which is profoundly dangerous, precisely because it sounds so undeniably reasonable. I mean, you have to keep the machine running, don't you?
You do, but the text offers this striking counter-perspective. It says, Jesus did not commission a monument. He commissioned a movement.
The distinction between a monument and a movement, I mean, that is everything.
It really is.
Think about how we interact with monuments. They are designed to be static. We build walls around them, we polish them, we hire security guards to ensure they are never altered or damaged.
You just admire them from a distance?
Exactly. But movements, by definition, are kinetic. They disrupt the landscape. They incur wear and tear because they are actually moving through the world.
A mission-driven organization is not supposed to be a polished museum of sacred memory.
So true. And you can actually diagnose this shift by listening to the vocabulary an organization uses, right?
Oh, definitely. The text points to the language of possession.
The language of possession. What does that sound like?
You have to pay close attention when the internal language shifts heavily toward phrases like our ministries, our building, our staff, and our budget.
I mean, that sounds pretty normal.
There is certainly a healthy communal version of that language, but it often reveals a deeper, more problematic spiritual posture. It's where stewardship mutates into proprietorship.
So ministries cease to be callings to be fulfilled and instead become institutional trophies to be guarded.
Precisely. And the theological critique the author levels at this self-preservation mindset is razor sharp.
The argument is that the core event of the Christian faith, the cross, completely shatters the logic of self-preservation.
Yes, at the center of the theology is a figure who poured himself out. Someone who did not secure his life by avoiding loss or hoarding resources.
Therefore, an institution that claims to be shaped by that specific narrative cannot logically make its own self-preservation its highest organizing principle.
It cannot build an entire financial apparatus around insulating itself from every possible cost or risk.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's think about a vintage sports car.
Okay, I like cars.
It's like someone buying a beautiful vintage sports car with the stated dream of driving it cross-country.
Right.
They buy the maps, they talk endlessly about the open road, they invite their friends over to look at the car in the garage.
They're selling the vision.
Exactly. But then they start spending tens of thousands of dollars waxing it, upgrading the climate control in the garage, installing high-end security systems.
And then what happens?
Eventually, they become so terrified of a single rock chipping the paint on the highway that the car never actually leaves the driveway.
Wow.
They are doing an immaculate job of maintaining it, but they have completely confused the vehicle for the destination.
That is a perfect analogy.
But pushing back on this practically, how does a leader actually know when they've crossed that line? Because distinguishing between responsible upkeep and building a static monument seems incredibly subjective.
The author's answer to that is entirely unyielding. The math will tell you. The math. If evangelism or community outreach, or whatever constitutes your core external mission, consistently receives only the leftover margins of the budget.
Just the scraps.
Right. If the administrative center is continuously shielded from sacrifice, while the outward mission is the very first thing amputated during an economic downturn, the machine has officially taken over.
It's protecting the core at all costs.
The text uses the phrase manager of its own faithfulness. An organization can become brilliantly adept at managing calendars, executing internal events, balancing spreadsheets, while entirely retreating from the costly, unpredictable work of engaging the outside world.
So it looks vibrant on paper, but it is inwardly shrinking.
Exactly. The author says continuity is not the same as calling.
Continuity is not the same as calling. That is a devastating sentence.
Yeah, it really hits hard.
You can be 100% competent at keeping the doors open and the lights on while entirely failing at the actual reason the doors were open in the first place.
Absolutely.
So, if the ledger inevitably starts serving the monument rather than the movement, what does that actually do to the people inside the building?
That's the real tragedy here.
Right, because the average person sitting in the pews or the average employee at a nonprofit isn't looking at the spreadsheets every day.
No, they usually never see them.
But according to this text, they are still being quietly, systematically trained by them. The text argues that budgets are discipleship documents.
They are deeply formative. Budgets don't simply facilitate ministry. They sculpt the moral imagination of the people involved.
Sculpting the moral imagination.
Yeah, the author makes the case that an organization teaches its core theology, not just through the words spoken from a stage, but through its financial patterns. It catechizes.
Wait, catechize usually refers to formal religious instruction, like memorizing a question and answer book about doctrine?
Right.
Are you saying that just by deciding whether to fix the stained glass windows or fund a local food drive, the finance committee is secretly acting as the primary theology teachers for the whole organization?
That is exactly what the text implies. They teach by repetition and resource allocation. Consider the psychological development of a child or young adult growing up within that system.
Okay, picture a teenager in this church.
They might see global missions celebrated loudly on one specific Sunday a year. The church brings in a guest speaker, hangs international flags, shows a highly produced, very emotional video.
We've all seen those services.
Right. But then as they grow up, they notice the underlying mechanics. They notice that the youth group van is literally falling apart, but the executive pastor's office just got a massive renovation.
Oh, that's a tough realization.
They noticed that the budget for local outreach was frozen for 3 years, but the church spent $50,000 on a new lighting rig for the main stage. What is the actual lesson that young person internalizes?
They learn that mission is a wonderful, heartwarming concept to applaud, but the real center of the universe is our own internal comfort and aesthetic experience.
Yes, and they learn that lesson permanently. They figure out what truly matters by watching what is defended hardest in a budget meeting and what is cut first.
Which makes total sense. Kids are incredibly perceptive to hypocrisy.
They are. Over time, this produces a congregation that is entirely fluent in the vocabulary of mission, but completely devoid of the reflexes of mission.
They know the jargon, but lack the muscle memory.
Exactly. They know how to say all the correct phrases about sacrifice and reaching the world, while living in a structure completely insulated from those realities. The text describes this as one of the most dangerous forms of spiritual fatigue.
Because the organization feels alive and busy while it is slowly hollowing out actual obedience.
It's just going through the motions.
To really drive this home, the text pulls from historical case studies that offer a staggering contrast to our modern obsession with financial safety.
Yeah, the historical examples are really challenging.
It points to the Church of Antioch in the biblical book of Acts.
The Antioch narrative is crucial here. They didn't just sit around forming study groups to admire the concept of missionaries.
No, the text in Acts 13 describes them fasting and praying, and when they felt directed to send people out, they didn't send their interns or their underperformers.
They didn't send the B team.
No, they sent Barnabas and Saul.
Let's translate that into modern organizational terms. Paul and Barnabas were arguably their absolute best teachers, their primary leaders.
And guys drawing the crowds.
Exactly. Sending them out meant voluntarily losing their highest producing staff members. They didn't hoard their top talent to build a massive religious empire locally in Antioch.
They actively destabilized their own leadership structure for the sake of the outward movement.
It's almost unthinkable today. And the text also points to the Macedonian believers mentioned in the letters of Paul, who gave out of severe economic poverty, not out of a comfortable surplus.
But perhaps the most jarring modern historical examples the author uses are figures like William Carey and Hudson Taylor.
Oh, the William Carey story is wild.
Let's look at him. He is often called the father of modern missions. He went to India in the late 1700s, but he didn't just buy a ticket and go, right.
No, he needed an entirely new financial structure to make it happen.
Right.
He famously told his supporters back in England, "I will go down into the pit if you will hold the ropes."
The rope holders.
Yeah. The Baptists back in Kettering who formed the Baptist Missionary Society. The text implies that the financial reality for those supporting churches was intense.
They weren't just tossing leftover change into a basket.
Not at all. Funding Carey required those local churches to embrace massive financial risk. They were funding a man traveling halfway across the world with no guarantee of success, no immediate return on investment, and frankly, high odds of him dying from disease.
Because travel back then was a coin toss.
Exactly. They were operating under the conviction that the Great Commission, Jesus' final mandate to his followers to go into all the world and make disciples, was actually a binding, non-negotiable command.
Not an elective course you take if the building fund is fully topped off.
Right. The historical baseline is that the gospel is supposed to create a giving, risk-taking, sending community, not a self-contained religious club.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Because reading this and hearing these historical examples of extreme sacrifice, it can very quickly start to sound like a massive, crushing guilt trip,
I can see that.
right? Are we actually saying that paying the electric bill or ensuring the children's ministry has safe, clean rooms, or, I don't know, upgrading a sound system so an elderly congregation can actually hear the sermon is inherently unfaithful?
That's a very fair question.
If a church isn't sending all its disposable income overseas like the rope holders of the 1700s, are they failing? Because that feels like an impossible, highly romanticized standard that just leads to leadership burnout and organizational shame.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author actually anticipates that exact reaction.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the text is very careful to clarify that this diagnostic process is not about weaponizing financial guilt.
So it's not about shame.
No. It is fundamentally about proportion and orientation. The text explicitly states excellence is not the enemy of faithfulness.
I love that quote. Excellence is not the enemy of faithfulness.
It's very balancing. Seeking alignment does not mean you stop paying your staff a living wage, or you intentionally let your facilities crumble to prove how spiritual you are.
Right. A functional organization must care for the people and the structural systems that make any ministry possible in the first place.
Exactly.
But in the real world, distinguishing between a necessary structural system and an inward-focused comfort is incredibly blurry.
It is the hardest part of leadership.
Because think about it, a comfortable, well-lit, aesthetically pleasing building attracts more people.
Sure.
More people bring in more resources and donations, which arguably allows the church to fund even more external mission down the line. It's the trickle-down theory of ministry growth.
The trickle-down theory.
Right, so where is the actual line between overhead that serves the mission and overhead that swallows the mission?
That is the brilliant tension of the text. The author isn't offering a rigid mathematical formula.
Like, exactly 30% must go outside the walls.
Right. There is no universal percentage.
Yeah.
Instead, the text demands that leadership teams relentlessly ask the diagnostic question: does the overhead serve the mission, or does the mission serve the overhead?
That's the filter.
Exactly. And that trickle-down theory you mentioned, that is exactly what the author warns against.
Really? Why?
Because historically, organizations tell themselves that building the massive, comfortable fortress will eventually lead to more mission funding. But the psychology of self-preservation dictates that once the fortress is built, it requires so much capital to cool, heat, insure, and staff that the eventual mission funding never actually materializes.
The margins are eaten by the machine.
The margins are eaten by the machine.
Yeah.
A mission-shaped budget doesn't ignore the electric bill. It simply refuses to let the electric bill and the internal comforts become the unchallenged gravitational center of the universe.
So, if funding only our own comfort is so detrimental to the soul of an organization, and if we all intellectually agree that the outward mission is the main thing, why is self-preservation the default setting?
Because it's human nature.
Right, but why do thousands of organizations constantly drift back toward this inward focus? The text dives into the root psychological cause of this phenomenon, framing it as a deep, primal battle between trust and fear. It calls it the economics of the kingdom.
This is perhaps the most profound theological layer of the entire chapter. The author argues that behind every single line item allocation and behind every hesitation to spend money on an outward mission lies a fundamental spiritual test.
What's a test?
Do we actually believe God will provide if we obey?
Wow. The text drops a phenomenal line here. It says, fear is a terrible financial theologian.
It is a perfect distillation of the problem. Fear speaks fluently in the language of narrow realism.
Narrow realism.
Yeah. When the board meets, fear sits at the table and says, we must keep enough just in case. Or, we cannot commit too much to that local food bank too soon because the economy might dip next quarter.
It sounds so responsible.
That's why it's so dangerous. Fear is highly effective because it makes scarcity seem eternal and inevitable. It convinces an organization that if they practice radical generosity today, there will definitively not be enough tomorrow.
Let's use an analogy to understand this scarcity mindset. Imagine you are stranded in the ocean, holding on to a life preserver.
Okay, pretty scary scenario.
Very. Fear tells you to grip that life preserver with every ounce of your strength. You grip it so tightly, your muscles cramp, you become exhausted, and ironically, your panicked flailing actually causes you to slip under the water.
Because you're paralyzed.
Exactly. Trust, in this scenario, isn't throwing the life preserver away. It's relaxing your grip enough to actually learn how to swim.
That's a brilliant way to look at it.
Fear thinks survival is found in hoarding the safety device. Trust understands that survival is found in kinetic movement. And the text connects this to Jesus' teachings in Matthew chapter 6.
The famous passage about observing the birds of the air and the lilies of the field.
Right.
The author argues that Matthew 6 is not just a pretty decorative image to paint on a coffee mug or a nursery wall.
It's not just poetry.
No.
Yeah.
It is a radical dismantling of the human illusion that life and future security are achieved through relentless accumulation and control. Jesus is asserting that anxiety is a totally inadequate master for human life.
Because anxiety can expertly measure danger and calculate risk, but it cannot actually secure the future.
Exactly. And when the text applies the logic of the resurrection to financial imagination, the paradigm shifts entirely.
How so?
If the central claim of Christianity is true, that Christ is risen and death is defeated, then loss is no longer ultimate. Giving money away isn't just subtraction, it is planting a seed. The kingdom economy doesn't operate on scarcity panic.
It operates on an assumption of divine abundance. But once again, let's look at this through the eyes of a fiduciary board member listening to this.
The pragmatist.
Right, the person who actually has to balance the books. It's easy to say trust God when the bank account is full.
Oh, very easy.
And giving is up 10% year over year. But if I'm looking at a spreadsheet that is bleeding red, isn't stepping out in faith just a spiritualized excuse for being fiscally reckless?
You're saying a bank isn't going to accept trust as a mortgage payment.
Exactly. If giving has dropped and inflation has driven operating costs through the roof, how is it not just irresponsible?
The author navigates that exact tension by distinguishing between anxiety and prudence.
Anxiety versus prudence, okay.
The same biblical text that commands "do not be anxious" in Matthew 6 also commands leaders to count the cost before building a tower in Luke 14.
Right. Jesus actually mocks the guy who starts building a tower without enough capital to finish it.
Exactly. So the text explicitly condemns recklessness. Trust does not cancel the need for operating reserves, transparent accounting systems, or responsible oversight.
Trust is not financial denial.
No. You don't just empty the bank account and hope for a miracle. The difference lies in the ultimate goal. Prudence asks, what is faithful, sustainable, and wise for the long-term mission?
And what does anxiety ask?
Anxiety asks, how can we protect ourselves from every possible scenario of loss?
So prudence is a servant of obedience. Anxiety is a rival to obedience.
That is the core distinction right there. Trust is what gives prudence its direction. A leadership team that trusts God doesn't spend blindly, it spends courageously.
Courageous spending.
Yes, it uses financial reserves not to build an impenetrable fortress, but to act as a shock absorber that allows the organization to take calculated missional risks. Trust ensures that fear does not get the final vote in the boardroom.
So we have diagnosed the problem. We see the slow drift. We see the budget acting as a confession of self-preservation.
We understand the deep psychological battle between fear and trust.
But what does this mean for the actual mechanics of change? How does a leader fix this without causing an absolute mutiny?
Yeah, the practical application.
Because if you walk into a board meeting on a Tuesday night and declare, we are cutting all internal programs by 40% to fund global missions because our current budget is rooted in fear, you are going to get fired.
Instantly fired.
Right.
Or the organization will fracture down the middle.
Right. And realistically, the leader in that scenario probably should face pushback because that approach lacks pastoral wisdom.
It lacks basic human empathy. The text is incredibly practical here, Section 5, which focuses on strategic reallocation.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts.
It states unequivocally that the answer to long-term mission neglect is not reckless, overnight reorganization. The author warns that theatrical, sudden change generates fear much faster than it generates fruit.
Let's expand on theatrical change. We see this all the time in the corporate world and the nonprofit sector.
A new CEO or a new lead pastor comes in.
Yep. They want to make an immediate splash. They want to prove to everyone that they are radical, decisive, and mission-focused, so they just start aggressively slashing budgets and firing personnel to signal how serious they are about the new direction.
And the text identifies that specific behavior as the first of 5 major dangers leaders must guard against. Theatrical change prioritizes the appearance of boldness over the slow, unglamorous discipline of wisdom.
It just traumatizes the organization.
It absolutely does.
So what are the other 4 dangers the text lists?
The second is hidden resentment. This is when leaders use budget cuts as a passive-aggressive tool to punish certain groups, departments, or staff members they personally dislike.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, masking it under the guise of mission alignment.
So, like, cutting the youth ministry budget by 20%, claiming it's for global outreach, when really the lead pastor just finds the youth pastor annoying.
Precisely. It weaponizes the ledger.
That's toxic. What's the third?
The third danger is detached administration. This is the classic mistake of a finance committee retreating to a closed boardroom, making sweeping spreadsheet changes, and then dropping the new budget on a congregation without ever shepherding the people through the emotional reality of those changes.
They treat it like a math problem instead of a human problem.
Exactly. The fourth danger is false urgency, manufacturing a fake financial crisis to panic the board into authorizing changes they wouldn't normally approve.
A sky is falling tactic.
Right. And the fifth is mission romanticism. That's the naive assumption that just because a line item has the word mission attached to it, it is automatically a wise, effective, or fruitful expense.
Just slapping the word on there doesn't make it sacred.
No, it doesn't.
So what does this all mean? The methodology of real change has to be deeply pastoral, not merely administrative. because budgets are inextricably attached to people.
Every single line item on that spreadsheet possesses an emotional history.
Someone championed that specific program. A specific family donated the money for that facility upgrade.
Right. If a leader just violently deletes a line item, they aren't just erasing a number. They are touching a congregant's sense of value, identity, and institutional memory.
Which is exactly why the text advocates for incremental change as the most faithful, effective method of transformation.
Incremental change is key. The author suggests that a mere 1 or 2% shift in the budget annually, sustained consistently over 3 to 5 years, is incredibly powerful.
Just 1 or 2%.
Just 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
It builds trust. It normalizes outward mission as a standard part of the financial rhythm without triggering the organizational amygdala.
The fear center.
Exactly. Small, repeated, predictable acts of faithfulness reshape a corporate culture much more effectively than one grand, unstable, traumatic gesture.
It's remarkably similar to physical therapy.
How so?
If a patient comes in with a misaligned spine that has been curving the wrong way for 10 years, the chiropractor doesn't try to violently yank it straight in one session.
They would literally break the patient's
It
picture.
would. Instead, they use steady, incremental pressure. They make micro-adjustments over weeks and months so the body has time to adapt. And more importantly, so the surrounding musculature has time to build strength to actually support the new healthy alignment.
That is a brilliant analogy. And during that organizational physical therapy, the leadership has to be incredibly clear about the terminology they are using.
Terminology matters.
The text stresses that clarity is a moral necessity. One of the primary reasons organizations struggle to reallocate funds is because their internal categories are so vague.
Give me an example.
Well, if the word mission is used as a catch-all bucket that includes everything from an evangelistic trip overseas to buying donuts for a local volunteer meeting, then the word means almost nothing.
It loses all its weight.
Leaders have to draw clear distinctions between what is truly sacred and what is merely familiar.
Let's dissect that. The difference between the sacred and the familiar. That is a massive insight.
It really is.
A recurring expense can feel absolutely untouchable to a congregation just because it has been in the budget for 15 years. People assume it is the sacred core of the church's identity, but really it's just an unexamined habit.
It's just comfortable. The text mentions that sometimes the most profoundly spiritual thing a leadership team can do is stop doing what is redundant. They have to find overlapping internal programs that are competing for the same dollars and trim them down.
And as they trim the familiar, leaders have to continually communicate that loss isn't always synonymous with decline.
That's a hard sell for most people.
It is, but in the kingdom economy, sometimes loss is the doorway to freedom. If a church actively releases capital from a familiar, comfortable internal program in order to strengthen a gospel witness in a marginalized neighborhood.
That is not an indicator of weakness or failure.
Not at all. That is an indicator of maturity. An organization does not become poorer when it gives to its outward mission. It becomes truer to its nature.
It becomes truer. I love that. Which leads us seamlessly into the final, highly practical section of this text. The diagnostic toolkit.
Yes, let's give people the tools.
The author doesn't just leave us with theology and theory. They provide a literal 6-step path toward financial and moral alignment.
Let's walk through the mechanics and the psychology of why these steps actually work.
It is a phenomenal framework because it bridges the gap between raw data and actual cultural change.
Yeah.
Step 1 is to map your mission-related spending with absolute precision.
And this is harder than it sounds. Accounting software is generally designed for tax compliance and avoiding embezzlement. It's not designed for tracking moral alignment.
Right. The text urges leaders to dig past the generic category labels and calculate exactly down to the dollar how much is going outside the walls.
Step 2 is the confrontation. Compare that precise spending data with your stated values. Put the spreadsheet next to the vision statement.
And let the cognitive dissonance sink in. It's uncomfortable.
Right.
Step 3 is to identify where the largest percentage of your funds actually goes. Confront the gravity of your overhead. Is it personnel? Is it the mortgage? Is it event production?
And then you get to step 4, which is where the genius of this methodology really shines.
Step 4 is crucial.
Propose one budget adjustment that increases mission alignment. Just one. Don't overhaul the entire ledger.
Limiting it to one adjustment is a masterclass in change management psychology.
Why is that?
When a board is presented with a total budget overhaul, decision fatigue sets in immediately. The amygdala, the fear center of the brain, hijacks the room. People panic.
It just shut down.
Right. But proposing one single, clear, mathematically small adjustment bypasses that fear response. It allows the board to say yes to mission without feeling like they are destroying the institution.
It's manageable.
Exactly. Step 5 details the communication strategy. Present that single adjustment to the congregation as an act of faithfulness, not as a threat, a crisis, or an indictment of past behavior.
And finally, step 6 is the long game. Make this specific review process a normal annual rhythm, not an exceptional event.
Right. If you only audit your budget for mission alignment once a decade, when a new leader arrives, it feels like an emergency intervention.
It feels like an interrogation.
Yeah. But if you do it every November, it just becomes a healthy habit loop. Alongside these 6 steps, the text offers some incredibly penetrating diagnostic questions that leadership teams must ask themselves behind closed doors.
Questions like, are we consistently funding comfort more than calling?
Where are we institutionally overprotected?
What specific initiatives are currently underfunded simply because they are less visible to the donors, less convenient for the staff, or less safe for our reputation?
Those are difficult conversations to initiate, but the author saves the most brutal diagnostic question for last.
Brace yourselves.
This raises an important question. The text asks, if an outsider studied our spending without ever hearing a single sermon, reading our website, or meeting our staff, what would they conclude matters most to us?
Oh man, that brings us right back to the auditor from the very beginning of our conversation.
Full circle.
And honestly, it's terrifying. It's the institutional equivalent of letting a stranger comb through your internet search history.
It is deeply exposing, and it forces a critical question. What do you do when the answer to that outsider audit is legitimately embarrassing?
Yeah, what happens when a leadership team sits in a room, looks at the numbers, and realizes the outsider would accurately conclude that they care mostly about their own aesthetic comfort and preserving their real estate?
The author's response is profound. You don't despair, you use it.
Lose the embarrassment.
Yes. The text shares this incredible case study of a congregation that was brave enough to do this audit. They realized their external mission support had been flatlined for years, while their internal expenses for things like stage design and hospitality had crept up year after year.
But they didn't panic.
No, they didn't fire the finance committee. They just followed step 4. They made one adjustment.
One micro adjustment.
They slightly reduced a discretionary internal program and redirected those exact savings to a local outreach center.
And then, crucially, they did it again the next year. And the year after that.
Consistency.
And the result of that discipline wasn't just a shifted spreadsheet. The result was a completely shifted organizational culture. Over a few years, the congregation actually began to expect mission to be funded first.
The entire spiritual grammar of the community changed from self-preservation to ascending mindset, because the ultimate goal of this entire diagnostic process isn't to generate endless cycles of guilt.
It is to generate grace and movement. Brutal honesty is the starting line for transformation. By making this review a normal rhythm, it stops being a traumatic crisis response and becomes a joyful, life-giving spiritual discipline.
It fundamentally changes the budget from being a defensive fortress into an offensive tool of stewardship.
So as we bring this deep dive in for a landing, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
You really have.
We have explored how a simple spreadsheet is, in reality, a profound confession of faith. We look closely at how the mundane, daily necessity of maintenance can quietly, imperceptibly replace an organization's core mission, turning vibrant movements into static monuments.
We unpack the deep psychological warfare between fear and trust.
Fear, which speaks the convincing language of narrow realism and scarcity.
And trust, which empowers leaders to practice courageous prudence.
And we walk step by step through the pastoral, incremental art of strategic realignment.
And the core takeaway for you, the listener, whether you are examining a multi-million-dollar corporate ledger, reviewing the budget for your local community theater, or sitting at the kitchen table looking at your own personal bank statements,
What's the takeaway?
is that the numbers possess a brutal honesty. They will always tell the unvarnished truth about what you actually value and what you deeply fear. You can hide behind visionary rhetoric, but you cannot hide from the math.
You really can't. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on a concept the text refers to as a theology of release.
Okay.
The author argues that in the natural world, a seed must be placed in the dark ground. It must be surrendered before it can ever bear life.
It has to die to produce fruit.
Exactly. In our modern world, we are entirely conditioned to measure success by accumulation. We look at the end of the fiscal year and ask, How large are our reserves? How much did we manage to protect? How big is the fortress we built?
It's all about hoarding.
But what if that is the wrong metric entirely? What if the ultimate, truest metric for an organization's success isn't how much capital it managed to hoard, but how effectively, selflessly, and courageously it managed to empty itself for the sake of its true mission?
That is the ultimate logic of the cross applied directly to a spreadsheet. It redefines the very nature of success, moving it away from preservation and towards surrender.
Exactly. So the next time you are sitting in a budget meeting or reviewing your own finances and someone pulls up that spreadsheet, remember, that document is your x-ray.
It sees right through you.
It is not murky. The jagged white line is right there, showing exactly where the breaks are between what you say you believe and what you actually do.
The only remaining question is, do you have the courage to read it?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take a look at your ledgers with a new set of eyes this week. We will catch you next time.